Here we are. So this week we are continuing on with our series on the I ams during Lent that Jesus said. They're getting to know who Jesus is really through what he says he is. And one of the, well, when I saw the title of this one, I am a door, I'll be honest, I was slightly confused at what Jesus would mean by that, because it's slightly different to the other I ams in this series. I think it possibly sneaks in as like some sort of average thing, in the fact that it's an inanimate object that Jesus is saying he is. And this is the only sort of inanimate object which is alluded to. But I suppose on the grand scale of things, we go from living things, vines and such, to things which are a bit more conceptual. I suppose it's not quite as weird as saying you're light, but it still feels very weird in itself. I am a door. But let's explore that. That's what I'm here to talk about today. So the passage is John 10, 1 through to 10. And I'll read it through now. Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who doesn't enter the sheep by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. But is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate. All who are before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Now, with these things, I suppose, as always, it's important to realize the context of who Jesus is speaking to and what's been happening before. So if you look in your Bibles, there's probably a bit, well, it's a new chapter, so there's a separation between this passage and the passage before. But in the original text, it's just one continuous story. And this leads on directly from my favorite healing miracle that Jesus does, which is where he heals the man born blind using his spit. We all remember that story. I don't think it was that long ago since we were talking about it, where there was a blind man, Jesus made some mud, healed him. And then, but what happened in between then and now is he went off, the Pharisees questioned him and basically tried to make him say that Jesus was a fraud and was possessed by a demon. And the man said no. And then the Pharisees kicked him out. And then essentially the Pharisees went looking for Jesus to pick a fight. And Jesus has already shared some sort of harsher words with the Pharisees when he decides to go into this, I suppose, proverb about who he is. So right from the beginning, the Pharisees currently, I suppose they're slightly bruised in their identity of themselves, which will be quite a strong theme throughout this passage, in the fact that they believe themselves to be the sort of authority when it comes to spiritual matters. And here they've sort of been taken down a peg. Their identity has been slightly shifted to what they believed it to be beforehand. Now, Jesus uses this as a chance to show what his relationship is with us. And he uses, in the first part of the passage, he uses quite a simple metaphor, I suppose, including shepherds and sheep. And because obviously we're all very brainy and know, and I mean, have read all this stuff before, we know that Jesus is putting himself forward as the shepherd, and he's putting us, his people, as the sheep. Now, traditionally, when people do talks about this sort of thing, this is where they start going on about how stupid sheep are. I'm sure we've probably all sat through, I'll say sat through as if it's been a torturous thing, but we've all heard a talk before where the person giving it starts talking about just how stupid sheep are, right? How they always seem to just throw themselves off cliffs and then follow each other until there's like this mass suicide of sheep because they're just too stupid to do anything else. And I'll be honest, this is a great British literacy tradition as well. When George Orwell wrote Animal Farm, and the animals finally took control of the farm and they kicked all the humans out, they wrote out this manifesto, which all the animals were to learn. And all the animals had a differing intelligence, let's say. Some of them could read their new manifesto. Others had to learn it from other animals telling them what it said. The sheep, on the other hand, after numerous attempts, just couldn't put more than 6 words together. They just couldn't hold on to it. So they had to learn, they got taught a mantra instead, which was 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. Nice, simple, 4 words, 4 legs good, animals are great, 2 legs bad, humans not so great, because the sheep are just so stupid. And throughout the book, that is the sheep's entire purpose, is just running around, not really having any idea what they're doing, just shouting the same 4 words over and over again. I'll be honest, my weekend has been a bit of a sheep chase, in the fact that there's been 2 quotes, which I've definitely read in 2 different books, which when I was thinking about this, I thought, what brilliant quotes I could do it. And I just can't find where they are anywhere. The first one is from one of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books, where someone lands in a sheep field in a flying saucer, and it describes all the sheep run and huddle into like a big fluffy pile in the corner. And it's described as an evolutionary tactic, which has not once worked in the millions of years of sheep's history. But unfortunately, because they have constantly died from it, they haven't been able to pass on this information. The other quote, which has been even more elusive for me to find, because unfortunately I seem to have read a lot of books including sheep recently, and I don't really know why. I'm not a sheep fan. My library isn't filled with sort of Shaun the Sheep books, but there's one where someone says sheep are born knowing 99 ways that they can kill themselves, but they are all absolutely determined to find that 100th. Sheep, absolute idiots. Everyone's constantly dunking on them. Oh, look at the sheep. They always kill themselves. And in fact, it goes on to, in a sense, outside of all this, into sort of just modern, I suppose, internet culture, or just culture, in the fact that sheep are quite commonly used as a term for someone who follows orders blindly, blah, blah, quite often conspiracy theories. Actually, to be honest, basically anyone, when they're talking about someone with different political views of them. And I suppose this comes from the fact that everyone believes that they're fairly smart, and therefore anyone who doesn't think the same thing as them is obviously some sort of idiot and is just following someone else blindly. Anyone else is a sheep. And because, as I said, I've spent so much time on Google just searching sheep quotes, what's actually come up, which surprised me slightly, was, I'll share, sort of a bunch of these sheep memes, trying to, I'm not sure if anything like this has popped up on your Facebook at all, but it's always stuff about how bad it is to be a sheep. If it's this monstrosity at the front of a wolf head on a sheep's body, which apparently is a good thing that we should be aiming for, to be different to the sheep. Or the one that I dislike the most is the one on the top left, where it says, I'm not a sheep, and then has the sort of dictionary definition of that. But quite clearly, that's a dictionary definition of what they're saying a sheep is, not I'm not a sheep. You know, the dictionary doesn't have a sentence and then just gives you a definition underneath of one of the words. Terrible writing. Also, the little one denotes that sheep, swayed or led, is in fact the main definition of sheep. As if like that's what, whenever 90% of the time when people talk about sheep, that's what they're talking about. Ah, yeah, sheep. That one person who just follows blind. Sheep by and large, in our everyday society, is not something we want to be, because they're idiots. It's just a well accepted fact. And let's face it, I think most of us probably have idiotic sheep stories. A few years back, I was in the Peak District on a walk, and I'll be honest, the weather had not been kind to us, and we were sort of retreating down into this valley. And the valley was fairly steep either side of the path we're on. And we go past, there's this sheep barring away, going quite, it seems like semi-distressed, but like we weren't too worried because it's the Peak District and there's sheep literally everywhere. And we get about 50 meters down this path, and this lamb comes running up towards us, tiny little thing. And it looks at us in the eyes, which, because it was on quite a steep slope, it was at eye level already. And it looks at us and it's got this face of anguish and distress, right? This little lamb. I don't know if lambs actually have facial expressions, but in my head, in my memory, this was a properly distressed lamb, right? You could see in its eyes just how upset it was. And it looked at us in the eye and it went, "Bee!" like that at us. And it didn't take too long to realize what had happened is this baby lamb had lost its mother, who was probably the sheep that we just passed. Because it was so windy, they couldn't hear, like, any bar and bleating sounds were just being thrown away in the wind. You couldn't really hear anything else. So we tried to help the lamb. So we looked at it directly in the eyes and we pointed towards its mother and we shouted, "Over there! She's over there!" The lamb did not understand because sheep are idiots. Completely away before you sort of stay up at night worrying about what happened to this poor lamb. Probably ended up on someone's plate, to be honest. So, but sheep, right? Idiots. That's what we know about them. You don't want to be a sheep because they have no idea what they're doing and they're probably just going to fall off a cliff. But when Jesus talks about sheep, the sheep he talks about aren't idiots. I mean, they're not brainiacs, but they recognize his voice. He doesn't talk about sheep because they're stupid. He talks about them for this idea that they have this recognition of not who he is, but of who their shepherd is. They understand the sound. There was a story quite recently about a Scottish shepherd who'd gone to the Middle East to see how they shepherd. And they did this experiment where he swapped clothes with this Middle Eastern shepherd's sort of traditional outfit. And they both tried to lead away this flock of sheep. And everyone thought what would happen is the sheep would see the guy dressed up like their shepherd and would follow him. But they didn't. They didn't follow the guy who looked like him. They followed the voice of their shepherd because they knew it. In this section, in this bit, Jesus is really talking about our relationship with him, and he's not talking about us as mindless animals running around and trying to kill ourselves, but talking about us as sort of beings who can recognize and even know when something's not right. It says they will run away from a stranger's voice. Another sheep story. I have actually one of my earliest memories when I was in reception, so 4 or 5 years old. I went on a school trip to a farm, and this farm had a Victorian schoolhouse, which my little group of friends group that I'd been put in, we'd gone into, and out the back of it there was a little Victorian playground, I suppose, with a sheep pen right next to it. And we wanted to go in with the sheep. We thought that was a brilliant idea. And seemingly our teacher also thought it'd be a brilliant idea to let the 4 and 5-year-olds go into the sheep pen. The sheep, on the other hand, did not think it was a good idea to let the 4 and 5-year-olds into the sheep pen. And they obviously sensed that there was something wrong, because as soon as the teacher opened the gate, they all legged it straight into the playground. And if it wasn't for a quick thinking teacher's assistant who closed the door for the Victorian school building, it could have been big trouble indeed. Hence my early memory of me and a group of my friends trying to wrangle sheep back into their pen. And I'll be honest, this is, you know, when you've got memories which are definitely not true. In my head, there's a lot of me like sort of jumping onto a sheep and then like bringing it to the ground and dragging it into this pen. But I mean, I was 4 years old and the sheep was probably a bit bigger than me. I don't think that's probably what happened. What probably happened is we all ran around going, ah! Like this, while the sheep just zoomed around and eventually ended up back in their pen. But the sheep understood we weren't the ones who were meant to be going in, and they knew they had to get out of there, and they legged it. The sheep have some sort of intelligence, and that's what Jesus was talking about. People who seemingly didn't have any intelligence about this matter were the Pharisees, who it says in verse 6, Jesus used this figure of speech that the Pharisees did not understand. And I quite like this bit because this is where Jesus sort of goes, oh, I can't believe you don't understand that. And he tries to dumb down what he's saying. Very truly, I tell you, I am. So he's not using these sort of, I suppose, not even abstract metaphors, but a metaphor of a second person shepherd and sheep. He's saying, I am. He is physically putting himself in the story. Pharisees, if you didn't understand that I was the, if you did not understand that I was the shepherd, I am now telling you, this is me, I am. And then he throws in a bit of a curveball, if I'm honest. I am the gate for the sheep. And I'll be honest, this was a bit of a stumbling block for me. Jesus, you're mucking up your metaphors all over the place here. You can't be the shepherd and the gate. And you didn't even mention a gate just now. You mentioned a gatekeeper. What are you talking about with you also the gate? It doesn't make sense. Until after many, many hours of research, but I say that, until someone said to me, these are actually, in fact, two separate images that Jesus is employing here, which I mean, look at us, a bunch of city slickers, basically, aren't we? We probably wouldn't quite understand, but for someone in a society where shepherding and sheep were much more of a prominent feature, they would have understood two different situations quite well. Situation one, where he's talking about the shepherd and the sheep and the gatekeeper letting people in and out. He would have been talking about a sheep pen, which would have been communal outside the village, or sort of near the village. The shepherds would come home, put all their sheep, like a sort of fancy cloakroom, I suppose, put all their sheep into the sheep pen. There'd be one person in charge to make sure that shepherds would come up and get their correct sheep and make sure no one's taking any extras. But it was quite a nice communal experience. The problem being for this area that lush green fields are not in sort of a massive abundance everywhere. So sometimes you have to take your sheep to go find it. Now, even today, there are shepherds who go off and live away with their sheep. I was quite amazed. I was reading another book which had a weird sheep influence in it. But this boy, and must have been about 2002, 2003, this bit was set. He was a 3-year-old who had went off with his grandparents who were shepherds in Afghanistan. And he described how they would go off and they would have their tent and their food with them. And they would leave for 9 months with their sheep in the mountains. 9 months without seeing people, just them and the sheep. Now, I'm not entirely certain if that's the amount of time that they would have been spending away from their sheep in Israel at this time. But when they went away with their sheep, they went away. It wasn't just sort of, they went a couple miles that way, ate, and then came back in the evening. They were gone, they were looking. And obviously you would have to then make a new sheep pen where you had taken your sheep. So they would make it sort of what they could. Now, an issue you have is if you're by a town, making a door is a fairly simple process. Well, I'll say fairly simple. You're making hinges and stuff. When you're out in the middle of nowhere, it's a lot harder. They would make like a wall and a fence. They're easy, nice and stationary. You'd make it, high enough that a sheep can't jump over it, and maybe more importantly, a wolf's not going to jump in. Sometimes they would even put like thorny bushes around the outside, on the top of their fence that they made, as a sort of early form of barbed wire. But you couldn't put a gate or a door there particularly. So what they would do is they would leave an opening, because you can't have a pen without an opening. Now the sheep are going to get in. How are you going to get in? They'd leave a gap, and then the shepherd would sleep in that gap. He would set up his camp. He would be the gate or the door. That's what Jesus is referring to here, is him being this sort of shepherd asleep or like guarding the entrance. The idea being that at night, if any of the sheep think, hey, you know what, we can make a break for it, their only way out is going to be to wake up their shepherd. And if any, I don't know, wolf or bear or sheep rustler thinks, hey, look at that, that sheep pen looks awfully like a packed lunch for us, they're going to have to wake up the shepherd to get in there. And the shepherd would sleep with a sort of big stick, and they would be able to, it would be made out of a tree root, and most of them would have been able to kill a wolf with one swoop, because they would have known, you know, to hit the wolf on a certain area, and that would take it down. It was quite a dangerous job. You don't really think of shepherding as a high octane job, do you? When you think of shepherds, you sort of just think of people in sort of long brown cloaks, sort of standing around whistling, don't you? Well, I suppose that's only if they've got a dog, but this is high octane stuff. There was danger everywhere for these shepherds out in the hinterlands with their sheep. So Jesus is referring to himself, not so much, I know I said earlier, as an inanimate object, but he's not. He's referring to himself sort of as a person, as a shepherd. My favorite type, the ones that are sleeping literally on their job. And then he goes on, he said something which I feel slightly, well, I've seen some bad theology around this, where he says, all who have come before me are thieves and robbers. And I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but before Jesus, I'll get my Bible here. Before Jesus, there's an awful lot of Bible before that. And you could possibly read that quite badly and say, well, obviously then, Moses and Abraham and anyone else who came before Jesus was one of these thieves and robbers. But again, back into the context of who he's talking about, who he's talking to, it's the Pharisees. Now, it wasn't uncommon in the time for Pharisees to, or not Pharisees, for people in general to talk about positions of leadership as to be shepherds. So these Pharisees would have seen themselves as the shepherds of their society, of the people in the town. So what Jesus is saying here is the Pharisees are the thieves, they are the robbers, they are the ones jumping over the fence, as it were, and the ones that the sheep are scared of. And this is sort of explained more. So Jesus says, I'm the gate, whoever enters through me will be saved. Another way that can be translated is will be safe as well. Not much of a difference in words, but quite a sort of distinction in the fact that you go into the sheepfold that Jesus is guarding and you are safe. Jesus isn't letting anything wrong happen to you. And as sheep, as he said, there's that trust between sheep and shepherd. And he goes on to say, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Now, when he says the thief comes only to destroy and steal, what he's talking about there is that the thieves are there only for their own personal gain. The Pharisees, who have been thinking of themselves as the shepherds, they haven't really been there for the people as such. They're not sat in their, so they're not in the synagogues going, man, we are really leading these people well. But they're thinking, man, I am a leader. And it's all about keeping themselves up in their sort of position of power, keeping their identity as the smart people. Their identity is the people who are currently leading. Jesus is stating here that is not what he is here for. He is here for the sheep, not his own personal gain. And it's a way, I suppose, of spotting who these false thieves are going to be, the ones who aren't coming in through the gate with Jesus and are in it for their own personal gain. And it's quite important because when this gospel was written, sort of later on in the early church, there was many false prophets coming up and many bad teachers. We see some of them Acts who were like trying to move or take over and control for their own personal gain this movement that's happening. And John is including this story almost as a warning to them, saying, look, you've got to know who we're following here. It's someone who's not doing it for their own personal gain. It is Jesus. As it says earlier, the sheep know the voice of their shepherd, and the shepherd knows the names of their sheep. I was really annoyed yesterday because I was at work in the morning and I'd been thinking all through this stuff through. And I got in my head Charlotte Church's song, I Love It When You Call My Name. I'm not sure if anyone knows that very well. I love it when you call my name. It's sort of how it goes. And I thought to myself, oh my God, this is like a really good, like obviously I've linked these subconsciously, or God has given me a message here. And this is I'm going to be able to use it as like a worship song. It's going to be really cool because it's a pop song and we're all going to be singing it. And then I got up the lyrics and I realized it was really not an appropriate song for singing at church. But I have had the chorus stuck in my head for the rest of the weekend. So if you're looking for something to sort of think about what the sheep were thinking when Jesus is calling their name, maybe look up the chorus only the chorus of Charlotte Church's "Call My Name." Don't look at the other lyrics; they're not important, not needed. But obviously, in life, people do seem to know our names, not always for the right purposes, and in like sort of weird modern twist, I suppose, on it. How often has everyone got an email? Oh, who this week has got an email from either HM Review and Customs saying that you have got a tax rebate available, DPD saying, or Royal Mail saying that there is a parcel that they haven't been able to deliver, despite the fact that you can't remember a parcel coming, or any sort of prince or something who needs you to send them a large amount of money over the Western Union so you can make more money. Has anyone received that email this week? Yeah, or you've received it at some point in the last month, haven't you? One of those emails. And they always start off with, not me. My email I set up many, many moons ago. And by that, I mean, I was probably 9 or something. And I didn't set it up properly back then because I only needed it to get onto the Lego website. So whenever I get an email, it assumes that obviously whatever database they've got my email from, they assume my name is like the first letters of my email address. So what I get instead is dear CCC-CCC, which is quite an obvious giveaway that I don't think the government is calling me CCC. It's not my initials either. My initials are CHC, if anyone's interested. But I'm assuming other people's databases might be a bit more correct and you're actually getting your name come through saying, dear you, there's an issue here. How many of you have clicked on those emails before and got yourselves into trouble? No, because we are all very smart people here. We know how to recognize. My work, about maybe once every 2 months, we get this mass email come around going, please don't click on links from people you're not recognizing the email from a very full-on IT guys. They have to completely rechange how our system is set up because one person accidentally clicks on a wrong email and now we're all getting spam. Actually, our IT department sends fake emails themselves to try trick us. The idea being that if we click on it, they will come down on us like a ton of bricks. Then why did you click on this link? And so, oh, is it dangerous? Well, no, we sent it, but still. They know these email scammers, they seem to know our name somehow, but they're not, you have that sense, don't you, already, that they're not your right, they're not there for correct purposes, because we've got that intelligence. We are the sheep, and we've got a sense of when someone is coming genuinely with us, or when they're using our name in a stranger's voice, I suppose, is this feels like a tenuous link now, doesn't it? You know, when you come up with great ideas by yourself, and as soon as you start talking to other people, you're like, maybe I should have thought this through a bit longer. No, I'm sticking to it. Who cares if it's terrible? I wrote it down in a notebook. It therefore must be brilliant. Back to the old, I've come up with an idea. It must be brilliant. But in life, we know the people who are looking out for our best interests. And we know that we should be listening out for Jesus because he does have our best interests at heart. And we've gone through a few weeks ago during the prayer course about, how to hear Jesus. And the issue with this one is because the door that Jesus is referring to is very much to the shepherd. A lot of the points that I can come up with are going to be covered next week in the shepherd one. So if I feel like I've skirted over anything, it's because I'm trying to leave Catherine some material on the shepherd stuff, just FYI. But we know Jesus is there to protect us, and we should be growing that sort of trust with him and that knowledge of his voice. That's the main purpose of this thing. We go into his sheep pen through Jesus to be safe. And we do it on our own sort of free will, I suppose, I should say as well. It's about us entering the gate rather than, Jesus calling the biggest, baddest sheepdog around to come force us into a sheep pen. So another warning, if it feels like you're being forced into a sheep pen, maybe it's not the sheep pen for you. So I'm going to finish my talky bit here. I'll pray. Lord, I'd like to thank you that you are there to protect us and that we'll be able to recognize your name when you call. I'd like to thank you, Lord, that there's a way of knowing who you are in the sense that you are for us, Lord, and that you're not in it for personal gain, but for our sort of own gain, that we can have life in its fullest. In your name, amen.